My family first kicked me out of the house and then tried to humiliate me at my wedding. I, Daniel, a 23-year-old man, was born into a middle-class family with my parents and my older brother, Marcus, who is 25. My parents were both university lecturers, and because of that, they naturally had big expectations for their sons. Marcus was the golden child, the straight-A student, the athletic one, and the one who had movie star good looks. He could charm anyone with a smile. Me? I was nothing like him. I struggled with school, carried a little extra weight, and lacked the confidence and looks that Marcus had. The only thing I excelled at was art, but in my parents' eyes, that wasn't a real talent. People often say, looks don't matter. It's what's inside that counts. Those people have never been ugly. Because in my world, looks did matter. And no one reminded me of that more than my own family. At first, I thought it was normal when my parents pushed me to do better in school. They wanted me to be successful, like Marcus. But their scoldings never stopped at my grades. Somehow, they always turned into comments about my appearance. Marcus is smart and good-looking. At least he has options. If you're not going to be successful, Daniel, you should at least try to look presentable. They constantly compared me to Marcus. Marcus never outright mocked me, but I could see it in his behavior. He never wanted to be seen with me at school. He walked a little faster when we were together in public. He never introduced me to his friends, and when I spoke in a group, he had this look in his eyes, like he was embarrassed I was even there. At family gatherings, when relatives tried to praise my skills, my parents always cut in with jokes at my expense. Oh, Daniel is artistic. Too bad he can't draw himself a new face. Maybe he should design himself a girlfriend, he's not getting a real one anytime soon. People would laugh awkwardly because my parents were the hosts, but I saw the way some of them glanced at me uncomfortably. I saw it. But more importantly, I felt it. Their words buried themselves deep inside me. I stopped trying to make friends. I stopped raising my hand in class. I avoided any school activities because I was afraid of being noticed. I started to believe that I was worthless. One afternoon, instead of going to the cafeteria for lunch, I sat alone in an empty classroom, sketching in my notebook. That's when Ms. Collins, my art teacher, walked in. She looked over my shoulder at my drawings and said, "You're really talented, Daniel. Have you ever thought about entering a contest?" I shook my head. She didn't leave. She sat down next to me and started asking questions. At first, I gave vague answers. But something about her made me feel safe, and before I knew it, I told her everything, how my own family made fun of me, how I had no confidence, how I had stopped trying at everything because I felt like I didn't matter. She listened. And then she did something no one had ever done for me before. She called my parents. That same day, she told them I needed to see a therapist because their constant criticism was destroying my self-esteem. They didn't want to look bad by refusing, so they agreed. Therapy changed my life. For the first time, I had someone telling me I wasn't the problem. For the first time, I started rebuilding my confidence. But my parents? They never changed. When I stood up for myself, telling them their jokes hurt me, they just laughed. "Oh, lighten up, Daniel. It's just humor." That's when I knew. I needed to leave. As soon as I turned 18, I would get out of that house. When my 18th birthday came, I had one tiny hope, maybe, just maybe, this time they'd celebrate me. I was wrong. The party turned into Marcus Appreciation Night. Marcus got accepted into a prestigious college. Marcus has a modeling contract. Marcus is so talented. I sat there, surrounded by 100 people, feeling completely invisible. The only person who tried to make it about me was my uncle, Richard, my dad's younger brother. At one point, he raised a glass and said, "Hey, let's not forget, it's Daniel's birthday today." The room went awkwardly silent. My parents didn't look happy about his interruption. Even Marcus said nothing. They muttered a quick, "Happy birthday," and immediately went back to talking about Marcus. That night, I went to my room and cried. The next morning, I woke up determined. I called a friend and asked him to help me find a cheap apartment. I had been working a part-time job and had saved just enough to get by. That evening, I started packing my things. My parents didn't even notice. It wasn't until I was carrying boxes to my friend's car that my mom finally said, "Wait, where are you going?" I turned to face her. "I'm moving out," I said. My parents looked at each other, confused. "Why?" my dad asked. I almost laughed. "Why?" Because for 18 years, they had made me feel like a burden. Because for 18 years, they had ignored me, ridiculed me, treated me like I didn't matter. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just said, "Because I want to." My mom shrugged. "Well, at least the house will look more modern without all your junk lying around," she muttered. I expected nothing less. Marcus, however, did something unexpected. As I was about to leave, he walked up to me and handed me a book. "It's one of my favorites. I thought you might like it," he said. I didn't know what to say. Marcus had never given me anything before. I stuffed the book into my bag without looking at him. And I left. Without looking back. For the first time in my life, I was free. I worked hard and focused on my passion. I realized I had a talent for software development and pushed myself. A year later, I got into a prestigious university on a full scholarship. I never called my parents. And they never called me. It was as if I had never existed to them. And honestly, that was fine with me. Moving out was the best decision of my life. For the first time, I had peace. No one was making cruel jokes at my expense. No one was comparing me to Marcus. No one was making me feel like a failure for existing. I got a job as a freelance graphic designer and started saving every penny. At night, I worked on my coding skills, slowly developing an interest in software engineering. Over the next few years, I poured everything into building a future for myself. And it worked. By 23, I was working as a software engineer at a well-known tech company. I had no contact with my parents. The only family member I stayed in touch with was Uncle Richard. Unlike my parents, he actually cared. Every holiday, he invited me to his house instead of letting me spend it alone. I never once missed my family. But they sure as hell missed my money. One day at work, our company needed someone to redesign the logo, and I volunteered. I was paired with someone I had never met before, a woman named Isabella. We worked together for 3 months, and in that time, she went from being a colleague to my best friend. We started hanging out after work, and it didn't take long before we realized we had feelings for each other. I fell hard for her. Isabella was smart, kind, and treated me like I was worth something. For the first time, I felt like I mattered. It wasn't until 6 months into our relationship that I found out who she really was. She wasn't just another employee. She was the CEO. She had built the company from the ground up. And she had never once acted like she was better than anyone. I didn't care about her money or her status. To me, she was just Isabella. After a year of dating, she took me on a trip to Paris and proposed. I was stunned. And, of course, I said yes. I had built a great life. I had a woman who loved me, a career I enjoyed, and a future I actually wanted. But then, I made a mistake. I decided to let my family know. The next day, I sent out a simple email to my parents. I also made a Facebook post announcing my engagement. I didn't expect a response. After all, they had ignored me for 5 years. But within an hour, I got a phone call. It was my father. For the 3rd time in 7 years, he actually wanted to speak to me. And suddenly, he was thrilled to hear from me. "Daniel. Congratulations. This is amazing news." I barely had time to respond before he invited me to a family dinner. I almost laughed. Now they wanted to celebrate me? Still, part of me was curious. I told myself it wouldn't hurt to hear them out, so I agreed. The dinner wasn't at their house. Instead, they had chosen an expensive restaurant, the kind of place that had 5-course meals and menus without prices. When I arrived, my mother and father were already seated, along with Marcus. He had changed. He wasn't the flawless golden boy anymore. He looked tired. Older. A little lost. As soon as I sat down, my parents turned on the charm. "How have you been? We missed you so much. It's been too long, Danny. You should visit home more often." I wasn't stupid. They weren't remotely interested in my well-being. They were just acting nice because they wanted something. So I waited. I let them play their game, smiling and nodding until they finally got to the point. "So, tell us about the wedding plans," my father said. I shrugged. "No plans yet." And just like that, their masks slipped. They started begging to be part of the wedding. "You have to let us be involved. We're family. Your father should walk you down the aisle. Marcus can be your best man." I could barely keep a straight face. 5 years of silence, and now they wanted to play the loving family? I leaned back in my chair and said, "I'll think about it." I already knew my answer. But I wanted to see how far they'd take this act. Then, the check arrived. And my father pushed it toward me. "You're marrying a rich woman, aren't you? You can cover this." That was the final straw. I threw cash on the table, stood up, and walked out. After that dinner, the calls didn't stop. Every day, I was bombarded with messages from my parents. "We just want to be part of your big day. You need to forgive us. We're still your parents." Eventually, I gave in. I decided to give them one last chance. I told them they could be part of the wedding, but under strict conditions. My father could walk me down the aisle. My mother and Marcus could be groomsmen. They agreed immediately. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had changed. I should have known better. The problem started immediately. A week later, my mother called me. "We've been shopping for our wedding outfits," she said excitedly. She listed luxury brands, talking about thousands of dollars in purchases. "You'll cover the cost, right?" I almost choked on my coffee. "Absolutely not," I told her. "But Daniel, you're rich now. It's your wedding. You should want your family to look nice." I hung up. After that, they tried a new tactic. Instead of demanding money, they tried sucking up to me. "You know, we're so proud of you. It's amazing how successful you've become. We always knew you had potential." I wasn't falling for it. I told them, "Buy whatever you want, but I'm not paying for it." Their response? Silence. A few days later, Uncle Richard called me. "Daniel, we need to talk. In person. Now." I met him at his house, and he told me something that made my blood run cold. "Your parents and Marcus are planning to humiliate you at your engagement party." I stared at him. "What?" He took a deep breath. "They want to frame you for stealing something, embarrass you in front of Isabella's family, and guilt you into giving them money." I felt sick. After everything, after years of treating me like trash, they were still scheming against me. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. "Okay," I said. "Then let's play along." They wanted to trick me? Fine. I'd turn the game on them. I sat in Uncle Richard's living room, trying to process what he had just told me. "Your parents and Marcus are planning to humiliate you at your engagement party," he had said. I leaned forward. "What exactly are they planning?" He sighed. "It's a setup. They bought a fake luxury watch online and plan to pretend it's a real one, an expensive gift for Marcus. The plan is to show it to you, then sneak it into your bag. After that, they'll accuse you of stealing it in front of everyone. They think Isabella or her family will pay them off out of embarrassment." I stared at him, my jaw tightening. After everything, after years of treating me like trash, my family still saw me as nothing more than a money machine. I exhaled slowly. "Okay. Let's play along. If they wanted to humiliate me, I'd make sure they were the ones who left in shame." The engagement party was exactly what Isabella wanted, an elegant event with only close friends and family. Unfortunately, that meant my parents and Marcus were on the guest list. I already knew what they were planning, so I came prepared. With Uncle Richard's help, we bought the exact same fake watch they had. I had no doubt that my father would plant their watch in my bag at some point during the night. When he did, I'd have Uncle Richard secretly swap it out with the identical one in my dad's bag. That way, when my father made a scene, I could calmly suggest he check his own belongings first. Then, I'd watch him squirm. Everything started smoothly. Guests arrived. Congratulations were exchanged. People were drinking, laughing, and having a great time. And then my father approached me. "Daniel, take a look at this," he said loudly, making sure people around us heard. He held out a watch, a supposedly high-end, designer brand. "This is a gift for Marcus," he announced. I acted impressed. "Wow, looks expensive," I said, playing along. "It is," my father said proudly. "One of a kind." I made a mental note of exactly what it looked like before handing it back to him. Then, I excused myself and walked away, pretending I didn't notice when my father patted my back, his clumsy attempt at planting the fake watch in my bag. Uncle Richard was watching from across the room. He gave me a slight nod, then casually made his way over to swap the watches. Now, all I had to do was wait. 10 minutes later, my father started yelling. "My watch! The expensive one! It's gone!" The room fell silent. I turned around, feigning confusion. "What do you mean, Dad?" My mother and Marcus rushed over, their faces full of fake concern. "You were the last one who saw it," Marcus said, pointing at me. I nearly laughed. They were so predictable. "Daniel, you should check your bag," my father said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Just to be sure." I nodded, playing dumb. "All right. If it'll make you feel better." I slowly unzipped my bag, making sure everyone was watching, and reached inside. Then, I pulled out a watch. But it wasn't theirs. It was mine. Uncle Richard had already taken their fake watch and slipped it into my father's bag. I held up my own watch. "Nope. Just my stuff in here." My father's face twitched. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Positive," I said. Then, I smiled. "Maybe you should check your own bag before accusing someone else." I snatched his bag off his chair before he could stop me. "Hey! What are you doing?" my mother shrieked. I ignored her and unzipped the bag. Then, in front of everyone, I pulled out the fake watch. A perfect copy of the one my father had shown me earlier. I held it up, raising an eyebrow. "Oh! Would you look at that?" The silence was deafening. People were whispering. A few guests even snickered. I turned to my father. "Dad, why was the watch in your bag?" His face turned bright red. He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but there was nothing to say. "You blamed me like you used to when I was a kid," I said. "But I guess your tricks don't work on me anymore." Everyone was staring at them. And suddenly, my family wasn't laughing anymore. They had humiliated me for years. But tonight? They were the ones walking away in shame. My parents left the party early, completely humiliated. The next morning, I woke up to voicemails from my mother. "I can't believe you would do this to us. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You need to stop holding on to the past." Oh, the irony. They tried to ruin my reputation, but now they were mad at me for exposing them? I ignored their messages. But they weren't done yet. A few hours later, Uncle Richard called me. "Check Facebook," he said. I opened my phone and saw that my parents had posted a long rant about how I had turned my back on my family ever since I got engaged. They painted themselves as the victims, saying I had been horrible to them and was disrespectful and ungrateful. They even brought up childhood mistakes, stuff like breaking a vase or failing a math test, to try to make me look bad. At the end of the post, they doxed me, sharing my phone number and encouraging people to talk some sense into me. My phone blew up with calls from relatives, demanding to know why I was treating my family this way. I was furious. I showed Isabella, and she immediately said, we should sue them for defamation. But I had a better idea. I uploaded a video of my father's outburst at the engagement party. I let people hear him screaming accusations, see his face when I pulled the watch out of his bag. And I added a simple caption. "Since my parents are so desperate for attention, here's what really happened. Feel free to judge for yourself." It didn't take long for people to turn against them. Their entire narrative fell apart. They had tried to shame me in front of everyone, only to end up shaming themselves. I blocked their numbers. I made it clear that they were no longer invited to my wedding. They were dead to me now. The only real family I had left? Uncle Richard. And when I asked him if he'd be the one to walk me down the aisle, he teared up and said yes. For the first time in my life, I had peace. And nothing could take that away from me. After posting the video of my father's failed scheme at the engagement party, my family's reputation collapsed overnight. People who had defended them before now saw them for what they really were, manipulative liars. I blocked my parents' numbers. I removed them from my social media. I wanted nothing to do with them anymore. I thought it was over. But my family wasn't done with me yet. Even though I had disinvited them from the wedding, my father and Marcus still hadn't returned the suits I had bought for them. I wasn't expecting to get them back, but then, out of nowhere, I received a package in the mail. Inside? The suits. Completely ruined. The fabric was water-damaged, wrinkled beyond repair, and reeked of mildew. That's when I remembered, at the engagement party, when my father and Marcus had stormed off, my father had accidentally stepped on a sprinkler. They must have stuffed the soaked suits into a bag and left them there to rot. I sighed. Typical. Isabella saw the suits and crossed her arms. We should send them a bill. I smirked. No. They've already lost more than a couple of suits. They've lost me. I threw them away. A few weeks passed. I was focused on the wedding, finalizing details, working on the guest list, and enjoying my life. Then, Uncle Richard called me again. You need to check Facebook. Again. I groaned. What now? But when I opened the app, I actually laughed. My parents had written another long post, but this time, they were begging for money. They claimed that after raising such an ungrateful son, they were now struggling financially. They didn't mention why they were struggling, maybe because they spent all their money on Marcus and expected me to fund their lifestyle? They just painted themselves as victims. They even set up a GoFundMe. The comments? A disaster. Instead of sympathy, people were roasting them alive. Maybe if you treated your son better, he wouldn't have cut you off. Didn't you just try to humiliate him at his own engagement party? And now you want his money? This is embarrassing. Get a job. Within a few hours, the fundraiser was deleted. They had tried one last time to manipulate the situation in their favor. And they had failed. Again. I knew my parents wouldn't respect my decision to disinvite them, so I hired security at the venue. And, just as I expected, my father and Marcus showed up. Wearing cheap tuxedos, they tried to talk their way past security. We're the groom's family, my father insisted. The security guard simply shook his head. You're not on the list. Please leave. They refused. They made a scene, yelling about how I was ruining the family, and that I was choosing money over blood. Isabella stepped outside, looking as calm as ever. Leave now, she said coldly, or I'll call the police for trespassing. My father and Marcus were stunned. They had expected me to cave. Instead, I had backup. With nothing else to do, they turned around, but not before my father stepped onto the same sprinkler again, drenching both of them. A perfectly fitting farewell. The wedding was everything I had dreamed of. Uncle Richard walked me down the aisle. My friends and true family were there. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. No more guilt. No more walking on eggshells. No more toxic family. And the best part? I was starting my own family. A few months after the wedding, Isabella and I started the process of adopting a child. Uncle Richard cried when I told him. That kid is going to have the best father in the world, he said. And I knew, finally, I had the life I deserved. As for my parents? Last I heard, my mother had a drinking problem, my father was still bitter and angry, and Marcus had moved to another city to escape the mess they created. He even sent me a half-hearted apology text. I left it on read. Because in the end, they had chosen money over me long before I ever had money to give. And I wasn't going to waste another second thinking about them. Final thoughts. For years, I thought I was the problem. I thought if I worked harder, tried to be better, maybe they'd love me. But the truth is, some people only care about you when they can use you. And if that's the only reason they want you around, they don't deserve to be part of your life. I lost my parents and my brother. But I gained a real family, the one I chose. And I have zero regrets. Good riddance. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.